Welcome. We are live again here at building Noahs Reef on the Magothy River. Got the great team from Maguire Marine putting reef balls in the water. So we're going to hang out here and you all can see what's happening out here as we build habitat in the Chesapeake Bay. There's a crew from the Magothy River Association. They've come out to observe. They're an integral part of this project, holding a permit for this reef site here, just off of Dobbins Island, which you see there behind the boat. We have our friends from Sonar Kings, Nick Garrett, using the Humminbird side scan here on his boat to image the bottom, see where these reef balls are being placed, so that Mike Maguire Marine here on the excavator can tell exactly where to place them. He's placing all 175 reef balls one at a time, using a line through the ball. And if you've already seen it from 2021, when Mike and his crew deployed some reef balls here, they're the ones responsible for a perfect grid of about 100 reef balls last time. Like I said, 175%. We have Jesse Eiliff, the Severn River, or director of the Severn River Association up there. There's Mike. Maguire Marine can build you anything you need here on your waterfront. Magothy River, Severn River, and beyond.
If it ends in the river, we got you covered.
There you go. If it ends in river, they got you covered. Even reef balls. So all of these reef balls were built by either Carroll County Elementary School students. I hope some of you are out there watching us. Or Broadneck High School students here in Anne Arundel County, as well as the Cape St. Clair community that came together to build Noahs Reef. We did that in October of 21, and here we sit now that the permit has been approved, where all these reef balls are coming together to build a reef to honor a very special place for a very special boy. Connor Brown here is an Eagle Scout that built some reef balls. That built reef balls that are out here. We have 3 different Eagle Scouts that supported this project. Connor and his dad were able to come out today. What you see there is a low-profile reef ball. These vary in weight depending on the thickness. We try to build them a little bit thicker because we're mobile. Plus, we're teaching folks how to mix concrete, how to do this hard work and work together in a team. This one's nice and heavy. I would tell you that probably weighs about 225, 250. These smaller ones down the end are an oyster size. Those were built by the Eagle Scouts. They weigh around 100 pounds, a little bit less. This is a specifically engineered reef design by the Reef Ball Foundation. Both the Reef Ball Foundation and Reef Innovations build reef balls and support this work throughout the world. Started in the early 90s. I know they're close to 70, if not more, countries, and their team travels, brings the equipment to folks, and makes sure that they can teach them how to continue to build reef habitat to restore corals, other hard substrates like oyster reefs, what we're doing here. These also protect against wave action, which is an important role our reefs play to stop erosion, because erosion leads to sediment. Sediment covers up the animals living on the bottom.
Talk about Noah.
Sure.
What?
This is sorry. Hey, Brian.
Hey, guys.
Brian Shoemaker is the STEM coordinator for Carroll County. He helped start this program in 2014 and has been with us ever since. He's a tremendous leader in this county school system, and we have so many great partners up in Westminster and the surrounding area. If we didn't have them, this program never would have started, and here we are again working with folks all over the state. We've now worked in 15 different jurisdictions building reef balls in Maryland and Virginia. We will have 8 Carroll County elementary schools built this spring, 6 Calvert County elementary schools completing a 2-year plan for all Calvert County 5th graders to build reef balls with us. And we will continue to work with community groups and anybody on the corporate level or that want to get folks together and organize a reef ball build. We can do that. We never charge a school. We are here to support education for 100% free, and that's why we fundraise throughout the year. You can see at the bottom a URL where you can go to our website and join CCA. We are a membership organization, and we welcome partners and members from all over the area. Anyone can join. We are here to benefit the public resource speak on behalf of the resource and speak on behalf of recreational fishing to make sure that we can improve the Chesapeake Bay into the future. There's a dog out with us. There we go, Mechanicsville Elementary School.
I did see a Hampstead a few seconds ago, but it might have gone in the water.
Oh, there's one with some names on it.
We're keeping track. We're up to 45 in the water.
All right.
I've got that data chart running.
There you go. Brian, again, is the STEM coordinator for Carroll County Public Schools. He works throughout the county to engage students in this program and many other important educational programs. We have Stacey Roth from Broadneck High, who's here as well. She leads work here in Arundel County. Cheryl Costello from Chesapeake Bay Media. Celeste Anderson from DNR, also who got this whole thing going to honor Noah. This is a beautiful spot that so many Anne Arundel County residents enjoy and have for generations. We have Gibson Island in the distance, Dobbins Island, Little Dobbins Island. The beautiful Magothy River is so accessible for so many people. That's why it's such an important place for people to enjoy time on the water, appreciating our environment so they can understand why it's worth taking care of.
One of the students wants to know about permitting and why they need a permit to go in the bay.
Sure, that's a great question. So you need a permit because everything you see around us, these waterways, these natural resources are public. And so the idea is that we entrust our government to take care of what we call public trust resources. And part of doing that is making sure that they have public interest in mind when considering who can do what out here in these public waterways. So there's federal and state level review of any permit. And that's to make sure that things like navigation, which is overseen by the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal body, they can make sure that we can navigate these waters safely. And so there's a clearance and a depth requirement of how deep the reef balls are and how much clearance there can be for vessels. That way, nobody will strike this reef. There's also, what are we putting in the water? Making sure there's no toxins or anything that can negatively impact the water. And that's why reef balls are so important. They are specifically engineered and the concrete is approved to make sure there's no negative impact. These concrete reef balls, once being poured, they do cure. That makes sure that they stable or they balance out from a pH perspective. This is extremely important in places with corals and other more sensitive organisms. The oysters can handle a little bit more of the acidity in this concrete, but again, it is neutral by the time it goes in the water. They're also added, we add some hardener to strengthen them and make sure they last a long time. And so all these things are an alphabet soup of agencies that oversee this stuff, and it's all defending the public trust and making sure that this is being done in a way that will not negatively impact the public in any way. What we are truly rebuilding is what we've lost over time with three-dimensional reefs in the Chesapeake Bay, harvest, disease, people living in the watershed, the impact we have, creating sediment, developing the lands and shorelines, all impact the bay. Nutrient pollution is a big thing. Nitrogen and phosphorus fuel algae blooms. Algae is a good plant. We need it out here, but when you have too much of it, it impacts everything. When algae dies, it actually removes oxygen from the water and creates what's called a hypoxic situation, so a lack of oxygen. We don't want that to happen. And so if we have animals like oysters and mussels and barnacles and anemones that all eat algae, ideally they eat enough algae to keep the water clean and not have too much dying algae. Dying algae makes our dead zones. The dead zones are no oxygen, and it's where no animals can live in the Chesapeake Bay, and that's not good for anyone. We have a great crew out here today. I'm going to check for some questions. We're so happy to have our elementary school partners from Carroll County and hopefully elsewhere viewing this video. Thank you so much for all your hard work. No matter when you've taken part in our program, your reef balls are in the water just like this, and we are building fish habitat. We say habitat today equals fish tomorrow. And that's good for everybody. Whether you like to fish or not, we need a diverse ecosystem. We like abundance. We like having lots of these animals out here because the Chesapeake Bay is such an important place that it can support so many different activities and so many different people to use our natural resources. We need to take care of them, and we want to use them. We want to access them. We all love a fish dinner just like anybody else. And so if you create habitat, that's the home for the fish. If you protect the waterways, make them clean, the fish can live in them because water is habitat too. Everything that happens from the surface to the bottom, even down in the mud, is extremely important. There's living animals up and down the water column, and we must protect it and take care of it.
Dave, someone wanted to know how many do not survive transport, so I was hoping you could zoom in
Yeah.
on that pile and
Sure.
show them that even the ones that don't, which are very few, still provide amazing substrate down in the bay.
Yeah, so Brian keeps track of a lot of the reef balls he builds and knows how many we lose. Over time, we lose a couple percent. And it's largely just because of variability in how people mix the concrete. A lot of times this is a brand new activity for the students that are hand mixing concrete. And so with Brian's portion of the program, they actually hand mix the Portland cement, which is provided by Lehigh Cement, a manufacturer up in Carroll County and actually globally. And so they bring that in. We get the pea gravel, which you can see right here, small little pea gravel. That flows and mixes really well for the students that are hand mixing. And then we have sand in here as well. And so ultimately there's a big rubber ball that makes this buoy, or the reef ball hollow. It's a big buoy similar to that one right over there. And so depending on how much air you put in that, you get a different wall thickness of this reef ball. Sorry, I got a phone call. These are rubber balls or dimples here that also make these holes. You can see how thin this wall is. Ultimately, concrete needs to be at least 2 inches thick to have some strength. Even when we add the additive, this one was just not strong enough to make it. And so they're still hard substrate. They're still clean. They're still ready to go. There's a piece with an oyster shell. These will go on the reef site. They are permitted to do so. And it just happens. But even the broken pieces do go in the bay and help. And you can see they all look a little bit different, and it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. That's how nature works. Everybody say hi to the world. Hello, world. We got some beautiful weather here on St. Patrick's Day. Enjoy yourselves and build some reef habitat. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And remember, share this. Now you see the ticker at the bottom. It was not playing before. Hi, Emily. Cambo. So the question is, I have a question. Will spat be added to this newly formed reef? So here in the Magothy, there's not a lot of natural reproduction of oysters in the current situation, like the current status of the bay and the population here. There's no harvest in this river, so it is all about restoration, any work like this that is done. And so by the red buoy is the area where 112 reef balls were placed previously. 12 of those received spat. Those are the baby oysters. They started their life at the Horn Point Hatchery in Cambridge, part of the University of Maryland system that's supported by both state and federal dollars. And ultimately those spat made it across the bay in a FedEx package to the great team at Chesapeake Bay Foundation and their Shady Side Oyster Restoration Facility. Then were placed in water because they're a living, tiny little baby oyster. And they were placed in water with reef balls in it. They get to swim around for a couple days, and then just like they do in nature, the spat attached to the reef. So 12 of the reef balls are already deployed here, have spat. And so people will say, well, why not more? One, we have to deal with what nature gives us. And unfortunately, in 2018 and 2019, we had record freshet. We had record fresh rain for more than a year period, or fresh water for more than a year period. That actually caused major delays and challenges with producing spat at the Horn Point Hatchery and throughout the region. And so ultimately it pushed back different priorities and projects. And so right now we only have so much spat growing capacity in their hatcheries. The state has made some strong actions to improve their investments in that work, and we'll continue to increase our capacity. But ultimately, the short answer is we don't take away from that capacity for this particular project because we know that other animals will attach. Oysters are extremely important, but so are mussels, anemones, barnacles. These are all things that attach to these reef balls, commonly called fouling organisms. They'll attach to your boat, to your pier, to anything in the water throughout the year. All these animals breed through broadcast spawning. And so the moms and dads only get so close to each other. The babies then live in the water column and float around until they can find somewhere to attach. And that's why hard substrate like this, what we're basically doing is replicating oyster shell, replicating an old three-dimensional reef, which would come up off the bottom. And so, again, long story short is spat could attach to these naturally. And also earlier this year, the team from Magothy River Association received spat on shell grown by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Chesapeake Oyster Alliance, and did place spat on shell onto this reef. And so that's a whole other thing these reef balls can do. That perfect grid that Maguire Marine built in 2021 can act as a base. Then spat on shell can be put there. Shell is another finite resource. Through the harvest of oysters, the majority of harvest goes south, goes down into Virginia businesses that shuck oysters. And this is largely because Maryland has lost their capacity to really make it work for a business to shuck oysters, as we've had boom and bust periods of the population. Some of the lowest populations or harvests that have been observed were in the early 2000s. That's led to a lot of formative work done by leadership in government and in academia and stakeholders to come up with the Oyster Sanctuary Program to identify areas of sanctuary, of wild harvest, and of aquaculture. These are the three pieces of oyster management. And it's really important to find that balance, not only for the stakeholders and users, but also for the what we call the benthic community, the bay bottom, the community that lives on this bottom and relies on oyster reefs. And so there's studies that have shown that oysters can filter anywhere between 30 and 80 gallons of water a day. I'm sure some days they don't eat, other days they eat more. They're probably just like us in that regard, and it's because they live in these waters 365 days a year. So different seasons lead to different portions of the life cycle of these animals and the annual cycle of these animals. And so everything's a little bit different. So anytime you hear a fact like 58 or 30 to 80 gallons of water a day, recognize that that's part of a scientific study, but it's not the exact fact of what will happen out here every single day. The Chesapeake Bay has over 11,660 miles of shoreline. Most of that is in Maryland because we have so many nooks and crannies and great little tributaries. And imagine the diversity that occurs across this bay and how many different things can happen that we will never know unless we observe. And that's why science is so important, but also the experience that people have on the water is a big part of managing our public resources and deciding what we do next for these animals. And so our program, being called the Living Reef Action Campaign, was built under the premise that what we're doing is building more than just a concrete reef. We're building a living reef. It is absolutely our goal to place spat on these reef balls as much as possible, but we look to be efficient. Let me get away from the noisy machine. We look for efficiency, not only in what other users need, what the bay needs, but also economically, not spending too much money on something that may not be beneficial given the current conditions where maybe oysters may not thrive. And so we do have the Tillman Island Reef. All are covered in spat. They've grown great. You can see some videos on our website from that reef. We also have a reef at the St. Mary's River right by the College Sailing Center, thanks to the St. Mary's River Watershed Association and so many great partners. A lot of our reef balls from Carroll County are going there. We have about 150 reef balls ready to go off of Chesapeake Beach, a really important charter fishing and recreational fishing port in the mid-bay. And so we try and spread them out, and we try and make a decision based on the ecology of the area, what does or does not get attached to the reef ball. And again, in the end, these are very similar to oyster shell in their chemical composition. And so the animals can sense that out in the water column and attach to it. And over time, they grow really well. Some of the first reef balls put in the water in Maryland were done with DNR and MES. A CCA member named Wayne Young was a big part of that, and he's written some tremendous reef books where you can find lots of information about that program's genesis here. But ultimately, they tested reef balls in a few different areas and went back and looked at them many years later and found them absolutely covered in life, especially down in Tangier Sound, which is our saltiest portion of the bay in Maryland waters, and just a very diverse and beautiful part of the bay. We check for some more questions here.
I got a couple questions here.
All right.
Question about the ultimate size of the reef. How many oysters can be on a reef ball?
Yep.
And how did the reef balls get on this part?
All right. So this reef, because of the permit, is 400 feet by 800 feet. And so I think this barge is about 60 feet long to give you some scale. And so it's quite a big space, but out here on the water, it's actually a small space. And ultimately, that will limit how big this reef can be right now. That permit process took close to 2 years to get approved. And so we have a timeline to work under this permit for quite some time and continue to build this. Ultimately, on these reef balls, if they were set in spat in a setting tank, I would guess that we'd have about 1,000 oysters or so if we had a really good set on one of these reef balls. That's at a spat level. That's when they're really small. If these had spat on them, we're talking about that little spot right there. You know, really small specks. They then quickly grow. And when we get back to shore, we'll definitely link more videos of that process, but you can probably find them at ccamd.org/LRAC, LRAC, which is short for the Living Reef Action Campaign. But ultimately, there was actually a study done of the Tillman Island reef balls, as well as reef balls at the Bill Burton Fishing Pier, which is temporarily closed. They were found to have at least 480 adult oysters on them per reef ball of a large number that have been sampled. That study also looked at the denitrification, or the nutrient removal by an oyster, because as they eat the algae, they absorb the phosphorus and nitrogen into their tissue, into their shell. And there's a number of studies showing what kind of benefit from a nutrient perspective oysters provide, and how we can add some extra investment in restoration, in aquaculture, and even now in wild harvest when supported by hatchery oysters. How do we calculate the nitrogen removal, add a dollar value to that, and then have folks invest in the restoration of the bay and cleaning our water quality? The ultimate, that study ultimately showed that these reef balls, which were mini bay sized, they're one size bigger than these, they did a really good job compared to a flat reef in filtering the water and removing the nitrogen. In fact, they did such a good job, the sealed tank that the scientists put it in on the deck of the boat, what they were doing was they were putting the reef ball covered in oysters and other animals into the tank. They knew that tank had a limited amount of oxygen that they were monitoring because it was a closed vessel. So as the oysters breathe the water with their lungs, their gills, breathe the oxygen out of the water, they actually dissipate the oxygen in the tank. And unlike an aquarium where we will pump air in so the animals can live in an aquarium, the scientists monitored the depletion of oxygen as a proxy for estimating how much the oysters were eating. So we can absolutely link to this study for folks that want to read it on a more technical level. I think I've done it justice. But ultimately we found, because you have this surface area on the outside, you have in these holes, you have the complete inside surface area, this reef ball, for its footprint on the bay bottom, which of course it doesn't even seal off the bay bottom, the animals can get in and out that way. Ultimately, the surface area you gain is going to give you so much more filtration ability compared to if it was just oysters on the bottom, flat. Plus, oysters on the bottom that are flat can be silted over by sediment and erosion, and we need that vertical relief.
So, how do we know we're not harming animals by putting them directly on top of them?
Absolutely.
Into the whole silt level?
Yeah. So ultimately here we have a muddy, sandy bottom, maybe a little bit of mixed shell. And what we're doing is, you can see that they have a limited footprint. And so ultimately we're not crushing anything. There's nothing under here that can't move. Believe it or not, there's actually really beneficial bacteria in our mud. There's worms, there's clams, there's lots of different animals that are fish food or food for other animals, and they can move. Generally speaking, the things that are down in the sandy, muddy bottom can move, and we're not really crushing them. An interesting fact, if you look at some of the work that the water quality monitoring team at Maryland DNR does, they have a tremendous tool called Click Before You Cast, or Eyes on the Bay. They have sensors throughout the bay and a hardworking team that assesses our resources and makes sure that we have clean water where there may be shellfish growing for human consumption. They also look at the data about dead zones and hypoxic situations where we don't have oxygen, so they can better understand what's happening out on our bay. A study in the lower bay, because of a persistent dead zone, showed that, unfortunately, we have areas that no things live in the mud. They did core samples of the mud, and not even bacteria live there. That bacteria would typically be eating some of the decomposing animals or algae and other things, but there was no oxygen in certain areas for so long that we found that there is no life on the bottom. And so unfortunately, that's not a place we would target for a reef. We just need to fix our water quality problems, and throughout the watershed, all the way up into New York, west into West Virginia, down into Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, DC. All the states need to work really hard to hit some of the goals that we're unfortunately missing right now, especially throughout Pennsylvania. But I know there's a lot of folks keeping an eye on things, and groups like ours, and any of you out there can always lend your voice to improving the Chesapeake Bay, making sure we hit these goals and improve the bay for years to come.
Yeah, I think
Any other questions? Thank you to our friends at Under Armour. Some great sweatshirts for our reef crew. Turn around real quick. There's some of the animals in the reef. See the reef ball, some of the oysters, some of that. When we got the ball up here, get the ball in the Living Reef Action campaign and get the all thanks to our friends at Under Armour. Another great important sponsor of habitat, education, and awareness, Yamaha Outboards, out here on the work barge. Yamaha Right Waters is an extremely important program they're doing throughout the country to improve habitat. They directly support this effort. They also support invasive species awareness. CCA has a great Chesapeake invasives count, which is watershed-wide. Anybody can go out and help us catch and report invasive species in the Bay watershed. We focus on snakeheads, on blue catfish, on flathead catfish, thanks to the Yamaha Right Waters support. We also do a great deal of youth engagement and getting folks connected to fishing. Again, I said it earlier, but those that go out and can appreciate the environment and can see it firsthand are those that are going to work to improve it, make it better for the future, and pass it on to future generations. So again, the team at Maguire, you can see they have this tape here. They're specifically moving at perfect intervals to lay out lines of these reef balls along that dock. And that way we know they're perfectly within the permit range, and we can maximize this space to create a nice hard bottom for all these animals to live. Some of these reef balls over time will get a little bit of mud and sediment up the side of them, but that's why it's important that they're nice and tall. They're just under 2 feet tall. We expect the mud line to come up to about right here, but the great part about this hole is as current flows through, it keeps sediment from filling it. And that's why these are a great design. Also, because they have a hole in the top, any water that flows in can flow out, and that won't lift the reef ball or move it. I said earlier, either on this live stream or another, that there's reef balls that have been hit squarely by a Category 4 hurricane in the Caribbean and did not move an inch. Protected the beaches they were built to protect and the wildlife that lives all over the reefs. Please check out the Reef Ball Foundation. They've just recently put together a great map that is continuously increasing with information that shows where reef balls have been used throughout the world. And we're glad to add ours to that map as well, and thank them for so much great support. These smaller size reef balls over here, the oyster size reef ball, these were actually built by the Eagle Scout, Connor Brown, who's here on board, Howard County. And these molds were donated by the Reef Ball Foundation. Yamaha supported this as well, and the Campbell Foundation for the Environment. So we could purchase these along with building conservation trust money that CCA has raised to purchase all these molds or have them donated. So we have about 40 molds that are this size, low profile. We have 20 oyster size. And you all missed the one slightly bigger reef ball in Mini Bay, but so we have 28 of those.
In like 10 minutes, we're actually going to do the N for Noah.
Great.
We're going to spell it. So, I mean, if it starts raining, you guys are more than welcome to take cover. You know what I mean?
So you're going to, what do you mean by
We're doing an N out of reef ball.
So what Mike Maguire is talking about right now is we're going to write an N to honor Noah. And over the time, we will write N-O-A-H. So it will say Noahs Reef. Right out here on the bottom, spelling with reef balls. And again, that boat right there has a Humminbird side scan unit, so we can see that on the bottom. That's a big part about just making a mark here on the river, a river that made an important mark on Noah's life. Of course, so many people have come together to build this reef, and that's what it's all about, working as a community. I was talking earlier about public trust resource. It belongs to all of us. The work we do at CCA is complicated at times, working through policy and politics and regulation. It's not fun, but it's so important to make sure that we have a bright future as we focus on ensuring the health and sustainability of our resources and anglers' access to them. If you're not a recreational angler, you don't go fishing, we want to make sure you can tomorrow. When you're ready, this bay is going to be ready for you. We want to make sure you have the resources available. We have a great stockpile of youth fishing equipment we just picked up from our friends at Tockerman Tackle. This year we'll be spending a lot of time working with students or youth and families that are not connected to the bay, giving them fishing equipment, giving them an experience and know-how so that they can come out and enjoy for future generations. As a native Marylander myself, I have a connection to this river through my family. I think many of us do. You know, there's many generations of people that have lived here that all care about the bay. You can't go very far without seeing a crab sticker or a Maryland flag, and that's a great thing. That's what we're so proud of. My great-grandfather used to fish here on days that rained, like today. Just starting to rain on us now. He used to fish this river a lot, and on Sundays, and lots of people have. This is a beautiful river, full of aquatic grasses, and lots of folks living here. We all have to work hard and make sure we protect this river.
Okay, wrap it up.
All right, folks. Well, it's raining on us. This is our second and final live stream for the day. The great team at Chesapeake Bay Media is out here. You'll see a great report from Cheryl Costello talking more about this program and some more pictures as we go. And again, thanks to the crew at Maguire Marine. If you all have any sort of project on our waterway, as Mike said, if it ends in river, they'll work on it. So this team can do a great job building docks, bulkheads, shorelines, living shorelines, and we hope to continue to keep them out here building reef balls with your support and the support of our community. Say bye to everybody.
Bye.
Starting to rain, it's time to roll.